Hi, everybody. Welcome back. Now, remember that this week you'll be taking your midterm for the Library and Information Science class, okay? It is a 10 question. I made it 10 questions. Before you take it, please review your review sheet that I posted on my site, and I know that you'll do very well. Again, once you finish it, hit complete so that we know that it's done and it will become graded and you'll know how you did. But I know that you'll all do well. Today, we're going to do our third lesson for the history class. And I just want to take a little time to review some of the things that we've already discussed. And in the first week, we talked about the first people on Earth and how through evolution, they developed and evolved, and they started in Africa and also Asia, and then migrated. They moved around because food was scarce, and they also didn't have the ability to grow their own food, and they weren't that great with fishing and hunting. So they did some of that, don't get me wrong, but it was hard for them. So they had to migrate around to look for food. Later, the humans crossed the land bridge between Russia and North America, which is now where Alaska is. There's still a little bit of islands over there. But at that point, it was a land bridge, meaning a connection between Asia and North America. And at that time, people began to migrate to North America and then slowly down to South America. So that was how that had started. We also discussed about the Sumerians, okay, and that they lived in Mesopotamia in an area between the Tigris and Euphrates River. And the Tigris and Euphrates rivers would overflow in the rainy season and other seasons. And what would happen is this water coming up onto the land would cause silt, which is fertile soil from the river bottom, to be pushed up into the area. That in turn made the area very fertile for planting. So the Sumerians were able to grow crops along this area. And that was one of the reasons why they were so successful. They were known for creating the first wheel. And there are pictures, we saw in one of the videos, pictures of wheeled carts in their writing. They also divided the day into two sections, 12 hours for the morning and 12 hours for the night. And we still do that today. And they also developed the oldest form of writing. So they were fairly advanced. After we talked about the Sumerians, we moved on and we talked about the Egyptians. And you remember, I love that stuff. I love those Egyptians so much. And they were it was a very great civilization. And its history was divided between the old, the middle, and the new civilizations. The ruler was called the pharaoh. And as soon as the person became the pharaoh, plans for his death started. They were beginning to work on the tomb that they would put his body in when he died. Now, people did not live as long as they do now. So that was one thing. And you always had an enemy who might want to kill you. So they started with this building of the tomb. The tomb was to prepare the pharaoh for the afterlife. They believed that the pharaoh, when he died, would go to another place, which would be very much like what he was doing now. But in the afterlife, he would still be a pharaoh, but he wouldn't be alive. He would be like a spirit. And what they did in the tombs was to fill them with things he would need for the afterlife: food, water, boat, so he could get there. They would even put his pets in with him. Sometimes they would bury slaves with him to make sure that he had help when he got to the other world. Like the Sumerians, they believed in worshiping more than one god, polytheistic, more than one. Okay. And then the next thing that we discussed with that lecture was the introduction of Judaism. And what we learned in Judaism was that it was the basis for Christianity and Islam. And the difference between Judaism and when we talked about the Sumerians and the Egyptians is that they believed in one God, monotheistic. Okay, so that's where that changed. So today we're going to talk about ancient Greece and its civilization. Okay, and it developed on, we're going to talk about the Aegean civilization, which developed on the islands in the Aegean Sea. And it was a very, very developed civilization. They produced ceramic bowls and pottery. They made great classical sculptures from marble. And prior to this, we didn't see that. That wasn't what was happening. And the importance of this culture is that it was really the basis of the great civilizations that were going to come. So I want to show you a little about that. Okay, so let's see if I can still do this. All right. And this.
Great civilizations appeared on our continent, flourished and grew during the 3rd millennium BC on the islands and along the coastline of the Aegean Sea, from which they get their name, the Aegean civilizations.
The Cycladic civilization was particularly developed. It was born in the Cyclades, islands that got their name from the fact they formed a kind of circle. The Cycladic civilization also produced
Yes, the pottery and the bowls that I was telling you about.
Among the most famous crafts produced during this period were the statuettes made out of Parian marble and coming from the island of Paros, home, later on, to greatest masterpieces of classical sculpture.
Aside from its artistic prowess, the importance of the Cycladic culture lies in the fact that it laid the basis on which one of the greatest civilizations of European proto-history would take root, grow, and flourish, the Cretan civilization.
The man who discovered it was Sir Arthur Evans when he began excavating on the island of Crete in 1900. He called it the Minoan civilization after Minos, the mythical king of Crete.
The success of these artifacts is demonstrated by the so-called Vasiliki vases that got their name from an area in the middle of the island and where many of them have been found. But the most significant fact in the history of Cretan ceramics is represented by the appearance in the Middle Minoan Age of the most effectively decorated works in the entire ancient world, the Kamares style. These were initially discovered near the town of Kamares in the caves of Mount Ida, where, according to Greek mythology, Zeus was brought up. They were exported everywhere as far as Egypt and the Syrian.
Some of these objects have deep symbolic value, like the double axe, called a labrys, which represented political and religious power wielded by the king.
The use of metal developed greatly in the field of weapon making, which was one of the most celebrated activities of the Minoan civilization. These swords are examples of their extensive production. Not only are they especially large,
Different types of jewelry were produced, from earrings and bracelets to rings and diadems, amazingly thin chains, gold necklaces with embossed or beaten elements, or decorated with precious stones like amethyst, onyx, sardonyx, and rock crystal.
the remains of the palace of Festus may appear unimpressive, yet they are the oldest architectural examples in Western culture.
Commercial trade with Egypt, Syria, and Asia Minor intensified. Minoan produce spread throughout the eastern and central Mediterranean as far as the coasts of the Black Sea, Sicily, and, according to some, even as far as Britain. These products included vases made out of stone, marble, and alabaster, of which we see some examples in the Museum of Heraklion.
The complex was protected by simple walls, guarded by small towers and guard posts. Here we see the remains of the East Bastion. The entrances stood on the north, west, and south sides. The north gate is situated along the ramp that leads to the harbour road. This vast courtyard led via the long processional corridor, thus named because of its richly decorative frescoes, to the main entrance. This was commonly known as the Great Propylaeon.
See that painting by the column? That's a fresco, painting on wet plaster. It was a technique developed at that time.
This is where the pictorial cycle that accompanied guests along the entire processional corridor concluded. It comprises two rooms, a waiting room or antechamera, where ambassadors and guests performed ritual ablutions before being brought into the presence of the sovereign.
The sovereign's the king.
And the throne room itself. Rows of seating lined the sides of the room like a crown around the throne. These were originally made out of alabaster.
Minoan architecture is marked by the harmonic relationship created between the building and the natural environment in which it finds itself. The facades are broken up as though the architect wanted to avoid straight lines and symmetry in order to have the building blend in with its surroundings. This is completely different from the absolute symmetry proposed by Egyptian architectural models or the ideal balance of Greek structures. Minoan architecture seems more intent on reflecting the autonomous and spontaneous flow of nature, which is why it articulates.
Where human figures are represented, they're usually involved in some joyful scenario or palace ceremony. White is used for women's skin, red for men's. Human figures are depicted with great vivacity and often in miniature.
Together with its architectural style, fresco was one of the great revelations of Cretan art. This kind of art reflects a dignified civilization where women played an important role, where the court was refined, lively, and sophisticated. Bejeweled women are depicted wearing finely embroidered clothes and complicated hairstyles. Their poses are natural and graceful. This figure is especially famous. Evans called her the Belle Parisienne because of her coquettish looks.
The conclusion is that the Cretans, whom many experts consider the first European nation, created a joyful civilization. They were lovers of pleasure, healthy and sophisticated, prosperous and self-assured. a civilization born in a peaceful and hard-working environment, based on deep religious feeling and boundless love of nature.
In this ideal atmosphere, the Cretan artist could explore the secret beauties of life and express the intimate world of nature through the multiple forms of art.
Okay. So you could see how developed their art was. So they had some of the most decorative art for their time, and they made those double axes, and that double axe was a symbol of real power. It symbolized the power of the king. Double axe, it's not enough to hit somebody with one side, has two sides. And they also made many swords. We saw pictures of the swords. They were very large and hammered out. And we also saw beautiful jewelry that was worn by men and women. And they used beautiful stones. They used golds. So it was very elaborate. And we also saw women depicted, and the difference in the paintings, the frescoes, the painting on wet plaster, was that the skin of women was white and the skin of men was a reddish color. We also saw that women were prominent. They were powerful in this civilization. And there were many pictures showing that. And they also showed the beauty of women with their hair in beautiful styles and that sort of thing. That was shown with the beading and that sort of thing. An interesting part about Minoan or Cretan architecture is that it doesn't have flat lines like we see in other, excuse me, in other civilizations like the Egyptian civilization. It tends to come out, go in, go that, go up. And they say that the reason why it was built like that was because they wanted to show difference of sort of like with nature. Some's closer, some's further away. They embraced nature and they made their architecture embrace it and reflect the nature that's surrounding it. Okay, the next thing that we're going to talk about is ancient Greece and its city-states, the Greek city-states. And Greece was formed by a series of city-states. Each is like a little city, like a little state in the United States, and each one had its own rule, all right? And the ruler of that city-state could make rules and rule in a method that they felt was right. The governments were all separate in these city-states. So it wasn't like a great big united Greek country. There's a lot of little areas creating the Greeks in the city-states. And the customs in the government could be completely different, despite the fact that the Greek or the Hellenistic society was there. There were some areas that were democracies, like Athens, where the power was in the hands of the people. Okay, that's what the United States is, a democracy. We vote on things, putting the power in the hands of the people, right? We elect people who are supposed to represent what we feel, right? And you could also have an aristocracy. And that was like in Thebes, where the noblemen, the higher class, okay, ruled and had the power. And there was the oligarchs, and that was those are small groups of citizens that ruled themselves, like the area of Sparta. So these are three famous areas, Greek city-states and also cities: Athens, okay, Thebes, and Sparta. They did not call themselves Greeks. They called themselves Hellenistic. And they believed that they were the descendants of the Greek god Helena. And religion plays a huge part in their life. Athens was the center of democracy and Western culture. And it was named for the goddess Athena, who is the goddess of wisdom. Sparta was a very strong military state. And it was believed that Hercules, the strong guy, was from Sparta. And Thebes was where where language was shared by all, and was the home of Oedipus and Cadmus. There's also one other famous city that is a very timely discussion at this point, and that was Olympia. And Olympia is, yep, where the Olympics started. Okay, that's where they first started. And the first Olympics were very different than what we see today. In the Olympics, they didn't wear uniforms. They competed naked. It was very, very physical. So after some time, these cities became overpopulated, too many people. So something called the Second Greek diaspora takes place. The Second Greek diaspora. Diaspora means to disperse, to spread out. So the Greeks scattered themselves to other lands along the Mediterranean, to France, to Spain and Africa and Italy, and in the East. So what happens with this diaspora? Is it good for them or is it bad? Well, it's actually very good for them. And one of the reasons why it's very good for them is that they get into different places and they see other cultures and other ways of doing things. And they begin to evolve into different people. They become more educated on things. And there was a lot of trade going on so that they could see traders coming from one place to another, bringing things in. And that also helped to educate them. And because of this trade and because of what was happening, they became a target to overrun, okay? So the Persian Empire, which was very, very strong, the Persian Empire decides that they're gonna come in and take care of the city-states and this area that's from the second diaspora, and they want to take over that so they get the trade and they get the money and they get people who can work for them and that sort of thing. One of the things that we see, sorry, with battle is that the Greek soldiers have a very specific way of fighting, okay? And it's called the phalanx. And it was the main formation of the Greek soldiers. And what they did is they stood very close together like this, and they almost made an impenetrable or a wall that people could not get by because they had these big, and you'll see in the video, swords, and that they kept out like this. So if people started to come at them, they would get speared. And then later in the rank, the other soldiers would keep their spears up like this. So if someone did overrun the first row, they would overrun, but they would be speared by the second row. So this lasted for several centuries, this reign. And in the 4th century BCE, we see the development of the Hellenistic society. Hellenistic Greek, all right? And it is quite advanced. And this is where we see the development or the start of Western philosophy. And the great philosophers began with the rise of Alexander the Great, who we will talk about. Up at this time, it was very hard to control Greece because it was compartmentalized. It was divided into small parts, okay, with a lot of different governing bodies. So it was very hard to rule it because this city-state says, no, I want to do it this way. This city-state says, no, I want to do it this way. There were a lot of ideas. And it was up until this time until the time of Philip II, that he conquers the region and he starts to be able to unify it into one country, one area. After Philip II died, his son Alexander the Great takes over and he inherits the Macedonian Empire. He was known to be a great warrior. He defeated many, many strong armies. He was also known to be a very good strategist. He thought about the battles. He thought about and he planned out his attack, all right, so that he could have the upper hand in the battle. Sometimes they would think that he would be coming straight out for them, but he'd be very sneaky and come around another side and take them by surprise, and thus would win that battle. Okay. So he was successful in invading the Persians, and the Persians were very powerful. And then he moved into the world of Darius III. Okay. And his success against the Persians really was when everyone realized what a great warrior and strategist he was. And that's why he was victorious in so many of the battles that he fought. Later, he even marched into Egypt. And when he got there, he claimed himself as a pharaoh. And if you remember, when we looked at the video about Egypt, they talked about pharaohs and they said pharaohs were not all necessarily Egyptian. So Alexander the Great claimed himself a pharaoh of Egypt, but he came from the Hellenistic society, okay? So when he conquered different areas and he took them over, this process is called Hellenization, okay? Conquering of the different areas by Alexander the Great was called Hellenization. And as he moves into these areas, one thing that he decides to do is he names a lot of cities after himself. So his name is Alexander. So he named them Alexandria. And the most famous of those cities is Alexandria, which is still today in Egypt. Okay. So during this time, I mentioned that Western philosophy develops. And the three philosophers that I want you to know a little bit about were Aristotle, Socrates, and Plato. Aristotle was Alexander the Great's tutor. And through Alexander the Great's conquests and his colonization, he begins to spread, okay, the teaching of Aristotle throughout different areas. And this Hellenization leads to the foundation of the modern age by common culture and language throughout the area and throughout the world. What happens is when this is sort of like reverse diaspora, as Alexander the Great conquers areas, he makes them follow his thought, his way, the Hellenistic way. So he's spreading the Greek culture and language to this population, and that is interrupting those populations' progress. Okay, so let's take a look at what I have for you, okay? Okay.
People with ADHD save 10 hours studying with this Chrome extension. But no, by all means, go ahead, skip the ad, save a few seconds.
I have to do a lot of reading for my job,
The ancient era is filled with stories from major empires and kingdoms, like the Egyptians, the Babylonians, the Persians, and the Hittites. But the history of ancient Greece took a different route. When we talk about Greece in ancient times, we are not simply talking about a kingdom, an empire, or a country, because they were not organized this way. Greece was formed by a large amount of city-states. Each city-state was like a tiny country. The Greek cities had total sovereignty over their territories because their governments were autonomous and independent. Therefore, a unified Greek state did not exist back then as it does now. Since each city was autonomous and independent, their customs and forms of government could be quite different between them. They could be organized as democracies, as it happened in Athens, where the power was in the hands of the citizens. It could also be an aristocracy like in Thebes or Corinth, where the noblemen had the power. And there were also oligarchies, where a tiny group of citizens ruled everyone else, as it was the case of Sparta. The Greeks from this period did not proclaim themselves as Greeks, but as Hellenic. Based on Greek mythology, Helenus was the son of Deucalion and Pyrrha, the survivors of the flood carried by Zeus and Poseidon. This way, the Greeks were direct descendants of Helenus. Therefore, religion had a major role in the establishment of a common identity between Greek city-states. The same was valid for the Greek language, which, in spite of its variations, was shared by all Greeks. Among the different Greek city-states, some were more notorious than others. Among them, we have Athens, the birthplace of democracy and Western culture. Its name derives from the city's protective deity and the goddess of wisdom. The powerful Sparta, a city with a strong military culture, descended from the Doric invaders, who, according to legend, were the heirs of the great hero Hercules. The city of Thebes, founded where once was the old kingdom of Boeotia, was the home of the mythological kings Oedipus and Cadmus, the city's founder. The city of Corinth, in turn, had a strategic location, separating the peninsula of the Peloponnese from the rest of Greece, and for that, the city was always involved in major clashes. We cannot forget the city of Olympia, home of the Olympic Games. This pan-Hellenic event was crucial to strengthen the cultural bonds between the different cities. The Greek model of city-states achieved major success. The cities were culturally and economically prosperous. However, their success brought a brand new problem: overpopulation. To fix the issue, the Greeks started to launch expeditions to colonize new lands. This movement became known as the Second Greek Diaspora, since the first happened after the Doric invasion. Thus, the Greeks scattered themselves throughout a major portion of the Mediterranean lands. Colonies were established in France, Spain, Africa, in the Italian peninsula, and in the East. The Greek city-states founded where today we see Turkey's coastline, like for instance Samos and Miletus, developed themselves quite rapidly, taking advantage of new forms of knowledge brought from the contacts established with new cultures due to trade activities. These cities became immensely wealthy, and so they were a target for the powerful Persian Empire. The clash between the Greek city-states and the world's largest empire appeared to be unavoidable.
Hold on. I'm just trying to get this on.
I will admit, throughout much of the time I spent learning about ancient civilizations as a child, I always just kind of assumed the Greeks were united in their own empire, kind of like most other cultures you tend to learn about. I mean, if Rome, Egypt, Persia, China, and all the rest had singular unified empires, then why not Greece? Although we may learn about all the people, culture, history, and accomplishments of ancient Greece as just ancient Greece, the cities surrounding the Aegean Sea in the first millennium BC were of course far from unified. What we call ancient Greece was actually a collection of different city-states, all split apart through politics and wars, yet intertwined through alliances, religion, and culture. So what were these city-states, and how exactly did they function both from within and from without?
Brought to you by generous supporters on Patreon.
First, let's take a look at what exactly an ancient Greek city-state was. The term polis, plural polis, is often used as a shorthand for these city-states, as it is the Greek word for city, and indeed what these cities were classified as in their heyday. So that's the term we're going to be going with purely for simplicity. There were a total of over 1,000 polis spread throughout the Mediterranean, dotting the coastlines of not just modern Greece and Turkey, but also Libya, Egypt, Italy, France, and many other nearby countries, with some even all the way in Afghanistan. Some of the most well-known of these polis, though, included Athens, Sparta, Corinth, Thebes, Rhodes, Ephesus, Miletus, Cyrene, and Syracuse. A polis generally encompassed a particular city, the Asti, and also its immediate surroundings, including any farms, harbors, or smaller towns servicing the city, classified as the Chora. At the center of the Asti was often a fortified citadel known as the Acropolis. Also, side note, indeed while we might call this part of Athens the Acropolis, other polis also had their own acropolises. The one we all know of today is just the Acropolis of Athens. The Asti frequently featured a central agora, temples, gymnasia and theaters, and walls to protect themselves. But buildings alone do not make a city-state. Polis were effectively independent political entities, with their own governments, either democratic or oligarchic or even tyrannical, their own minted coins, and often even their own colonies. The people of a specific polis were also often granted citizenship within that specific polis, and indeed the concept of citizenship is said to have first emerged among the Greek polis. The inhabitants of a polis, though, were also separated into different classes. At the top were free men born legitimately to citizen parents, who were entitled with the right to vote, run for office, and bear arms, though they were also obligated to serve in battle. This was only true after the age of 18, though, and their female relatives were a step below, offered full legal rights but no political rights, as it was the adult male citizen who was supposed to represent their interests. Below them were the metics, not medics, metics with a T, derived from the Greek metokoi, meaning trans dwellers, who were basically foreign citizens with full legal and political rights at home, but no political rights in their polis of residence, and might have also had to pay a metic tax. Liberated slaves were also given this status in Athens. Lastly were the non-liberated slaves, who were basically property with no rights whatsoever. All of the Greek polis had a common Hellenic culture and language, more or less, we'll get to that later, as well as a common religious tradition. However, the people we all collectively label as the Greeks descended from many different Greek tribes, the foremost major of which were the Achaeans, Aeolians, Dorians, and Ionians. In Greek mythology, the tribes were all descendants of the patriarch Hellen, spelled with two L's and not to be confused with Helen of Troy, the progenitor of the Greek peoples, and indeed the reason why the people of the Hellenic Republic called their country Ellada, and not some variation of Greece or Yunanistan. Hellen had three sons, Aeolus, Doris, and Xuthus, the latter in turn having two sons of his own, Achaeus and Ion. And yes, hopefully you can see a pattern here. The Achaeans and Aeolians originated in and around Achaea, or the Peloponnese, and Thessaly in central Greece, though the Aeolians would be largely pushed out into the Aegean Islands, possibly through Doric invasions. A notable example of an Aeolic polis would be Thebes. The Dorians originated from southern and western Greece, and up into Epirus in modern-day Albania, near their close cousins, the Macedonians. Some examples of Doric cities include Sparta, Corinth, Megara, Argos, Pylos, and Olympia. Finally, the Ionians were perhaps the most...
Okay, the second video gets very technical about where everyone was from. I just wanted you to see that there were so many city-states and how there were different levels of people as well in that one. And the first video that we watched, we did sort of reviewed what I had taught you about city-states and why the area was called Hellenistic and not Greece, and some of the problems that came up because of these individual city-states. What I would like you to do is to, when you see these videos, I try to find as many as possible that have subtitles on the bottom, the words, so that you're hearing what he's showing you. So you're practicing listening and reading, all right? Now, not all of them come that way, but whenever I do find those, I try to show them to you because you and I can't have an interchange between each other, all right? I can only do a lecture, I can show you a video, I can explain something. But as far as reading goes, we're not really getting a lot of that. So I'm hoping that when they have the subtitles, you look at that as well, or do it the second time you look at the video. They're not that long, to practice your reading ability as well as you're listening. And so we don't really have a lot of speaking. So you might read it out loud saying, finally, the Ionians were perhaps the most widespread of the 4 major tribes spreading, so that you could practice that as well. All right. So I'd like you to get as much as you can out of your classes. That's it for today. I hope that you have a wonderful week. And again, remember to take your library midterm, and I'll see you all next week. Enjoy. And guess what? I think it's going to snow on Sunday, so we'll have another snowy day. All right. Enjoy, everybody. I'll see you next week. Bye.